All right, I'm early, and I'm here with Rico. So I'm not certain how many people are going to be in here yet when once I get started. I don't even know. I don't expect anybody really. Maybe one. I don't know. Uh, but anyways, you always can run it back about as far back as you can, and watch me when I'm not. What do you call it? When I don't know, when I'm done. All right. So I might as well just get started since I started early. You may have seen Rigo walking in here. Um, so this is my fourth that I know of. True, what do you call it? Live stream. This is one that I'm actually thinking highly about turning into my first real uh, edited video. So I might turn this one. Obviously, I'm not going to turn this into that. As far as I know, live streams are exactly that. They're live, and you can't really change anything. As far as I know, maybe anybody who messages me later, please let me know. I'm still I'm still a student of this game, although I have a lot of things that are going on in my life. So, like I said, I'm trying my hardest to get with my goal. And as mentioned before, my biggest thing is I'm going to be uh, live streaming WrestleMania right here on April 19th and April 20th. And then I'm going to see if I can live stream the NFL draft because last week I intentionally did the selection show for March Madness just to get an idea of what it feels like to be sitting here live on camera and watching a TV that's over there. So there's that. And at the end of this one, I'm also going to be mentioning something rather special. And that which I could tell you right now, but if you so later if you catch me live, if you watch this, I don't know how this goes. Anyways, so I'm just kind of doing this as a 5-minute thing before I actually get started on why I am here, and I'll re-explain myself once the 4:30 mark hits. First and foremost, I got to remember if I'm going to go live, do it right where you said it and hit the go live, and that's when it starts. I didn't want to stop this to mess up with the original go live. So here I am. Oh, and say hello, Reek. As I've said in my previous videos, I love this cat. He's 8 years old, and he's definitely going to be someone that when he goes to the scratching post in the sky, I will be mourning for about a week. So I'm waiting for the 4:30 hour to hit. This is a lot better than last week where it was an hour before he was going to eat. Okay, the time is now 4:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and the live stream officially begins now. So here I am, and if you hadn't read the thumbnail for this, I'm going to be discussing my time and my story about my time going to a broadcasting school back in Michigan. It's now called Specs Howard School of Media Arts, and I believe it's part of Lawrence Technological University, which is a big technological college that's up there. And a friend of mine actually went there. He didn't graduate, but he went there. But anyways, so I thought about this at one point when my brother went a few years prior, but he didn't. He ended up dropping out because he was working at another company where he was unionized and there was the possibility of him striking. So he was going to have to drop out to be a part of the strike. Strike never happened, but he moved on to other things and ultimately didn't finish up the college. When I was coming up on 18 years old, I had no idea what I wanted. I had no idea where I was going. It's not like I had college planned out and everything. There was things like when I was going to when I was in the band and I was fighting with my parents about going to a college where I would be in the marching band, whether I actually got a scholarship or I just auditioned and got in. And one of my biggest bitches was not being a rookie sophomore. I'm not gonna talk about that now, but maybe another maybe on another live stream I will. But anyways, so I didn't know what was next. I ended up going to a college called DeVry. It's now called DeVry University, but back then it was DeVry Institute of Technology, just so I can move out of the house and try to start my life. That crashed and burned. Well, it didn't really crash and burn, but about 2 semesters in, I started getting extremely, it's another long story that part I won't go into, but it had a little to do with my emotional problems and the fact that I felt as if the only real friends I'm ever going to have are the ones I had from high school. I tried making some friends, and sometimes I was successful at talking to some people in the past from those days, but it really didn't pan out. And the roommates I had were, so then I ended up dropping out, and then I actually did go away to a regular college, but I went to a place called Saginaw Valley State University, and that was more of a crash and burn than DeVry was. Partially because I had a lot of expectations of how college was going to be, and no, it didn't work out that way. And I was gone a little more than a semester in. So now at some point, I became one of these people that just had to have a brand new car. So I got like whatever job I could get. I ended up working at a hydraulics plant in Troy, Michigan, where another one of our friends and his father worked. They managed to get a few people in, like his son, another kid named Kevin we hung out with, and my one of my best friends named Ted. And the joke was, I remember when I was filling out the application out there, like, do you have any references? Well, you don't have to put any. As a joke, he was like, his father's like, you don't have to put any down. You could put these 3 guys, but it likely will not get you the job. And then just out of the blue, I heard you're hired. And I'm like, what? I was hired? I'm hired? I think I finally had to call at like 6 a.m. to make sure, and it was true. Well, I rushed into buying a car without realizing that I was slacking at the job. Until finally I got annoyed with the parts inspector, which eventually my friend actually became when that person quit. I don't know. And then I ended up quitting, and then I just was kind of stuck where I was. And at that point, I actually decided that I was going to try to maybe go to Specs Howard. Well, I had this whole ridiculous thing with my parents where for some reason they were like, well, we don't want you to go until then. Well, what do you want me to do now? Oh, I don't know, but you got to do something. Didn't make any sense to me. At that point, I joined the Army Reserves, but then that kind of pushed it back by about a year because I had to wait until August to go, and then I had to wait till January when I got out and moved on. And that was where on a previous live stream, I mentioned something about the girl that wandered into my life 2 days beforehand and initially messed with my basic training, like the first 9 days and the week before. Goodness gracious. Anyways, when I got back, I finally took the opportunity to go to the college. And I remember talking to someone, and then I was getting ready to go into like class number 3. They called it RTV, like in a number and then slash the year. I was going to go into RTV 396. When I came back with the paperwork that day, It turned out 2 people had dropped out of our TV 196, and do I want to join in? Well, yeah. I was in a hurry to get on with my life, get training, graduate, get a job, and start my life. So at 21, on the second day of the class, I joined. I started class. The problem is that day now, I had 3 things going on. Had to go to school. Then I had to miss part of the day because I had to work at a certain time, and I had a Red Wings game to go to. I had to a complete disaster, but I managed to get done with it. This whole thing. And let's never mind the fact that because I was thrown in there so quickly, the lady who recruited me in, that I was talking to this whole time, had to remind me, because I had this penchant for using swear words like a comma, that I need to be careful. And you want to know something? You're right. I knew it. I knew that foul language wasn't allowed on the airwaves here. I think it's BS, but that's beside the point. So, out of principle, I decided to keep it out of the classroom and off the air. Anywhere else, like, okay, fair game. And then this went on for who knows how long. So I went on, and I know there was times when I really had a rough time because of my emotional problems. And a lot of it, you could look at, and I wrote a letter to Specs Howard a couple of years ago, finally, like, explaining myself. Whether or not anybody ever got it is up to me, because, like I said, they're not even in the original build. Well, they had an original building, and then not too long before I went, they had moved to a new building. And now, like I said, apparently the whole thing takes place at Lawrence Technological University, Lawrence Tech. So that's where I ended up mailing the letter to. Haven't heard anything since, but whatever. At the time, too, building on that thing from the Army where I was looking for love, and then suddenly love showed up when it turned out I least expected it. I was still looking for love, and I was using Prodigy, which I was running up quite the bill being on Prodigy at night. And so that was taking up my time that could have been done, say, studying for one class. Now, the policy at Specs Howard was if you had to retake a test that you failed, and a C- was a fail, because that was lower than 2.0, that makes sense. You had to retake the test, and the best you would ever get is a C, no matter what you got beyond C. Sometimes sometimes they wouldn't even have you retake the test, because if it doesn't affect the actual overall grade, if going from C- to C doesn't affect the overall grade, there's no point in retaking it. So there's a couple of those happened. And another test I took was a quiz where, for some reason, I was given back the quiz that I failed, and it showed all the right answers. Then they had me go and retake the test. Well, I went into another room and then basically cheated. And that made me feel better, because at least I knew it would have been an A that I didn't deserve. But there was this one teacher, and I forgot what the actual class was about at this point. But her name was Mara, and that was the first time I ever heard anybody with that first name. Mara, like Laura, but with an M. At this point, I would love to meet twin sisters named Laura and Mara. It's perfect. But anyways, it was a class I knew that if I would have studied, I would have retained enough that I certainly would have passed, and passed with more than a C. Well, of course, I failed, and I was upset because I knew I would have done fairly decently in that test. It was the only test I took where I really felt like crap for the retake, because I know what I would have had, under normal circumstances. In the retake, I would have had a B-. But when I failed that test, I sat there hurt. very hurt. Hurt. I finally had to get up and I had to walk out, and I tried to find Lisa. And I remember asking the people at the front desk, they was like, "Is Lisa here? No, she's not here. Is she coming back? She's gonna be gone for a second." I went, "Oh." And I was ready to I silently broke down. She's like, "Do you need to talk to somebody?" Yes. And then he took me into this person named Randy Z. I don't remember his last name, but he went by Randy Z, but his last name was Z, started with a Z and was pretty long. So especially on radio, it's better. I mean, that sounds like a radio name. Hey, Randy Z here for 6 to 10, So anyways, I went in there and I was hysterical. I mean, I know I was loud, not screaming, but I was loud, and you probably could hear me beyond the door. And I know I was using foul language when I was upset. Talking to him about my life and how, this hurt that I didn't get. And they try to tell you that, the grades really don't matter. It's the knowledge and getting through. And I'm just like, first off, I think one of my arguments was similar along the line of an old Cascade ad where it's like, well, maybe they didn't notice. Well, we did. Yeah, maybe it doesn't matter, but it matters to me. I think that's how I saw it at the time. And then I remember, and now I'm, and especially at 50 years old, I fully understand where he comes from, because I said, plus I'm having a hard time finding a lover and someone to marry or whatever. And he goes, you should be happy about that. And I looked around, I saw like pictures of a kid, and I said, I don't see it from your side, at least not yet. And, this is where a couple times I've said, yeah, I'm single with a cat. I'm 50 years old, and that's just how it's going to be. I didn't see it that way back then. I was 21 and wanted someone that loved me. That kind of thing. I don't remember how long this went on, but I know I swore. I know that, people have had to hurt me. And the reason I mention this is because this leads into something that happens later. Okay. I don't remember how many weeks went in. I think it was probably like 8 weeks, 7 weeks or something like that. This woman named Sue calls me into her office and talks about all the times that I use foul language when talking to somebody. I will name names in a sense. There was a teacher named Bob, actually Bob Palmatier. I don't remember what I was talking about, but I did use the F-bomb a few times while talking, just in normal conversation, not being vile or, whatever you want, vicious or whatever it is, just talking. And then she brought up that he counted 14 of them before he lost count. Something like that. And I'm sitting here looking at her like, and I'm kind of like, get back with me when I'm swearing in the classroom or on the air. Get back to me when I accidentally let the F-bomb slip while I'm doing like a radio show on recording. Someone actually did get in trouble for that one time because I don't know what they did. I kept recording over if I made mistakes when I was recording how I sounded on a radio station. And I remember apparently one of my teachers, his name was Ray Prosser, really cool guy. I liked him. Okay. If you're watching, hey man, hello. And he was actually the one guy that I talked to later that kind of that tried to get me back on track, but we'll get to that in a minute. I guess he talked about how one guy messed up his tape, and he's like, F it, I'll give her the next one. And then he actually had it queued up to the one where he said that. And I'm like, ooh, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Anyways. So, I got through the first quarter of the, it was like 32 weeks of class. So I got through the first 8 weeks. And then at the same time, speaking of my constant quest for love back when I was 21. I was working at a place called Meijer, Meijer, not to be confused with like Meyer Jewelers or Fred Meyer, the Pacific Northwest grocery chain. But Meijer, if you're from the Great Lakes region, you know. If you know, you know. Or if you've been there, you've seen Meijer before. Or as we call it in Michigan, Myers, because apparently up there we put an S at the end of every store name, no matter what it is. Kroger's, Kmart's, Walmart's, Burlington's. I don't know. Anyways, but this is why if I ever want to make this into a professional looking video, I'm definitely going to try to limit what I was, although it'll be probably tough because I have to go on like tangents or put the tangents at the beginning and then have the tangents, and then tell somebody where to start or put a message to start at this minute if you just want to hear the story about what happened at Specs Howard. Anyways, where was I? Okay, so at Meijer, I was working as a cashier. And of course, back then, I probably wasn't exactly the face of I feel like I didn't choose customer service. Customer service chose me. And for a long time, I kept wondering why. I was the last person at some point you would have wanted in a customer service role, for God's sake. Sometimes I even question myself today. But I'm 99% better than I was way back when. So I got in some issues with being a cashier in general. And I also, there was another thing I probably should have learned about union jobs, which I've never officially been in a union job in my entire life. But union jobs will scrutinize you for the first 3 months or so because they know that once you're in the union, it takes, I wouldn't say an act of God to fire you. It just takes a couple of things: theft or violence or being laid off, one of the three, But speaking of that, that was the UFCW, which I used to use. Has a lot of fake names. My friend keeps beating to death the one I used to use, which I will not repeat here, but I will say Union for Certain Women, and that's how I felt about what goes on next with what happened to me at Meijer. What I came up with is Union that's fucking completely worthless. One of my friends used to work at a Kroger, which was unionized, and he always felt that being in a union as a bagger for Kroger was kind of a joke, because it's like, he made, instead of $4.25 an hour, he made like $4.90 an hour, but naturally the 65 extra cents he made was just to cover the union dues. And I kept telling him that, I kept repeating, I'm reasonably sure that the union contract was all or nothing. Everybody has to be unionized or nobody is. But anyways, so I was never officially in the union, and yet I'm chasing tail in that store anything between the ages of 16 and my age. And to anybody who is about to hit the keyboard, there was a time when 16 was legal in probably just about every state. In some states back then, I think it was younger. Nowadays, and everybody used to say 16 was jailbait. It's not. Do you ever watch a story about someone getting arrested for statutory rape and it's a 16-year-old, at least way back when? No, you didn't. It was always 15 or younger. But anyways, and I was 21, so it wasn't that bad. Come on. If I'm chasing a 16-year-old today at 50 years old, that's disgusting. But anyways, so yeah, I was chasing tail in my own freaking job, which I think I learned just about everything about that. I actually had a girlfriend for about a week who I worked with. It was the only girl the only coworker I ever dated. I was having casual sex with a married woman. And then I chased everybody else around, and ultimately I got called in the office for sexual harassment, which at the time I didn't understand. Well, I think up until that point, I always felt sexual harassment was like, superior to subordinate. No, it's everybody. I mean, if you're going to make your fellow coworker uncomfortable, it's harassment. And that goes on today. So, okay. I didn't understand it, and I was a little peeved, but it was like, what do I do? Okay, I'm going to have to kind of stop. And I kind of did. I mean, I didn't really like chase anybody after that or talk to anybody much after that. The worst part was 2 weeks later. So I come into work. I'm a cashier, so I had to go inside, get my what do you call it? My drawer. And just as I was about to leave, I got stopped by my line manager, who actually walked back into the cash office, gave the drawer back, and had me wait outside the office. That's when I was called in with her and the head manager, and basically ripped a new one, claiming of more and worse complaints of harassment, which includes one woman who I wouldn't have banged with a stolen dildo on a 75-foot pole. And I got into an argument, and I said, "Why are you effing with me?" And I think finally, and I don't think it would have mattered for unemployment, because number one, I wasn't there long enough to qualify for unemployment benefits from the state of Michigan. And secondly, I basically quit. I said, "Fine, thank you." I jumped up and pulled the door open and slammed it. And I went over and grabbed my jacket. And just as I was about to put on, I heard the door open. I threw my jacket down. I mean, my hands were up, but I was ready to fight the manager. But he said, "Give me the vest." And then I took the vest off. He said, "And don't come back." And that's when I grabbed my bag and took off. And then the married woman, who I was still talking to, told me that she overheard in the restroom up front there, girls mentioning my name, and "We did it. He's gone. It worked." So it was bullshit. Or at least it seemed that way. I mean, when I narrow it down, I always say it was due to what I thought was a bullshit reason, but it wasn't. Because, I mean, truth be told, I was chasing tail and bothering everything that had a vagina back then. And then I got called in for sexual harassment. Why would that happen, right? I can laugh at it now. I should have I think I've been laughing at it for probably about 10, 20 years, or I probably should have been laughing at this longer than I have, but I didn't. Because at the time, it was like, oh, I'm not going to have my longest job, which I was hoping to hold on to the Meyer job all the way through my tenure at Specs Howard. And I wasn't going to join a union. I gave some of because they started like slowly taking out the initial union dues. But then they sent me back like half of them, which I thought was BS. I'm like, I never officially joined the union. Give me back my money. Anyways, well, that's, it sounds like a tangent, but it really kind of was. But it leads into the next thing. So now here I am with no job other than the Army Reserves. And then I go off to school. Sorry if I'm shaking. Sorry if the computer was shaking. My foot was on the rolling thing down here. Anyways. And a couple weeks later, I'm at school. And I think the thing that put everything overboard was that someone up front says, "What's up?" And I think as a joke, I said, "A hard on an airplane." And then somewhere near the end of my day, I was called out of the office by Sue again. And this time I'm kind of like, what is it now? Because I'm kind of like annoyed, like, what do you want to talk about now? This is ridiculous. And as soon as we got in the office, she's like, "I'm terminating your enrollment." And I'm in shock, like, what? Why? And that's when she laid into me about all the swearing and this and that and everything. And the fact I said a hard on, or that I gave the finger to a speaker that said, because at the school, they bring a, junk wagon or whatever the hell, whatever slang word it is for a food truck. They bring that in and then you go buy something from there. And then someone said, Annette, attention, the food junk's got here. Go back to class. And I'm just like, nah. I gave the finger to an inanimate object and they got mad at me. They got mad at me over a joke where I couldn't break a 5 or for 5 singles. Well, thanks. Now I'm going to effing starve. And as she's saying this viciously, angrily, just literally, the way she's talking to me, it's not so much what people have said this to me all my life. It's not what's said. It's not so much what people say. It's how they're saying it to you. She's like so vicious. I just want to reach over the table and strangle her. That's how I felt at that moment. I was feeling at the time, okay, because of my emotional problems, I was feeling my life slipping away, my future just being shot in the ass. Now, of course, I'm only 21. My life hasn't even gotten started. And apparently I was just on the wrong road. Well, I didn't know it back then. You don't know when you're on the road until you get off the road. It's kind of like when you're in a relationship that was never perfect. And it's not until you actually get out of the relationship that you look back and go, Jesus Christ, what is the matter with it? What was the matter with me? What was the matter with her? Everything. What was the matter with him? If you're a girl or if you're a gay relationship, it doesn't matter. You see it in hindsight. That's why my 5th grade teacher was, as much as I couldn't stand him, my 5th grade teacher is the first one that said, everybody's hindsight is 20/20. Everybody has perfect vision when they look back. It's always perfect when you look back. But regardless, I was just like, I was getting angry. I was, my head was about to explode at that moment. I was angry. I was on the precipice. And then I went over and I went to speak to Specs Howard himself, who was still alive. He died back in the man was 96 years old when he passed away. He died in 2022. Just before I wrote just before I was going to send the letter off, and then I just finally decided I was going to send the letter off anyways. But I went to try to talk to him. Well, of course, he was trying to fob me back to Sue, and I'm like, I'm not talking to Sue. I'm talking to you. You see me looking at her? No. And then she kept walking in. At one point, and then this is where I've had just enough common sense to not give in to the temptation stuff. I had to get up and walk out of the classroom, walk out of his office, because I wasn't getting anywhere. She was standing there, and I was literally about to tell Specs, get her the fuck out of this office now! And then she probably would have terminated my enrollment, and I would have jumped up and went at her, and I wouldn't be here today. When I walked out of that room, when I walked out of that office, walked out of that building, got in my car, and drove away. So, and the other thing was, it was reduced to a 3-day suspension instead of being terminated. It was reduced to a 3-day suspension. But anyways, I just want to note that because I did return. I drove back, and I have always been sick and tired of having to explain this, of saying this. I drove back from Southfield, Michigan to Plymouth, Michigan. You'll see how, if you Google it, you'll see how long of a drive that is. My hands were on the wheel so tight that I'm surprised my knuckles didn't turn white. And if anybody at that moment had tried to pull me out of the car, I've always said I would have ripped the entire drive axle out I would have ripped the entire steering mechanism out of my car. That's how tight my hands were on that wheel. And the only reason I ever removed my hands was to be able to turn the wheel for whatever reason. A curve, well, if the curve was just, or having to make a turn, then you have to, do the usual turn, or the, as one comedian put it, the wax on, wax off thing. I don't even know if I did that. I don't remember. And the other thing was I could feel my teeth literally grinding against them. I can't even try to recreate that. That's how angry I was. The closest I came was when I had to get a tattoo up here, tatted over when I had when it was like raw, like a layer of skin was missing, and they said that hurt. I probably should have had like one of those little like plastic balls in my mouth to keep me from breaking my teeth, but that's the closest I've come. That is literally the closest I came to recreating that. I pulled in the driveway at work or at home. I opened the garage, or I walked in the front door. I don't remember which way I did it. I walked in the front door, grabbed the phone, and immediately called my mother and begged for help. The worst thing was, except for the few times beforehand, few like weeks beforehand, and my mother was constantly asking me maybe I should go see a therapist or something like that. And I was actually starting to put it off. Why? I don't know. But there's a long story behind why my mother, and up until that point, my mother was almost like, you don't need anybody now. And I later found out from my brother it was because my brother went for counseling, and the first therapist told my mother that all of his problems were because of her. And and I'm presuming that the last thing she wanted to hear was that all of my problems were because of her too. And I never would have blamed my problems on my mother. I have no idea why I had emotional problems that I've said in the past weren't even in any books. A lot of us have mental illness. Where am I? This again. I've shown this to you before. But we all have to handle it a certain way and figure out how to deal with it. But anyways, okay. So I went in there and I begged my mother for help. I needed help. I thought I was going to end up in a nut house, I swear, because the only thing that went through my head at this point was if I don't get any help right now, if I don't get help, I am going to get my hands on a gun. I'm going to walk into that college. I'm going to shoot Sue and Specs. And then I'm going to put the gun in my mouth and pull the trigger. This is where I was coming in and saying, my life was over when it really hadn't even begun, but that's how messed up my brain was at the time. People who don't see things the way we see them at those times, they don't understand. Nobody will ever understand. Nobody understands mental illness today. I mean, we do better with it now than we used to, but it's just how it is. It's how people have been. But anyways, so I returned to school, and I did actually start seeing a therapist, where eventually I scored my first antidepressant, Zoloft, which sadly, it's like it's much like one of those hair restoring things that makes you impotent. It's like, yeah, either way, you're not getting laid. I'll go into that in a minute. There's time. But I did return. I talked to Ray, and he was telling me, some guy in the radio industry took me aside and practically threw me up against a wall and told me to be careful. So I returned, and then I had to declare myself, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to, I'm going to have to really stop swearing like entirely. I can't even let the slightest swear word slip out. And then I tried to work with Sue. We tried to come to an impasse. The part that this is where this all comes full circle right here. I'm like, I wasn't saying anything. I told her I wasn't saying anything on the radio. She's like, swearing's not allowed in the premises at all. Well, I didn't know that. She's like, I said it in the what do you call it? The orientation. I wasn't at the orientation. I was brought in at the last minute. And this is where it gets to be BS from here. It was like, oh, well, let me mark that down on your record. Wasn't at orientation. What's that going to do? What's that? How's that going to give me back the 3 days you took from me? Because I didn't know. And therein lies the area where I swear to you, I was set up for failure. Because Lisa should have taken me to meet Sue, and Sue could have given me a quick orientation about the rules and regulations. I mean, I didn't get it at the time. Well, I kind of got it at the time that, they didn't want swearing. I didn't know they didn't want swearing at all on the premises, not even in the parking lot. And then I also didn't understand the concept of somebody overhearing you and ratting you out. I mean, I get it now. If say a studio door is open, I'm like, well, this is in bullshit, and it gets caught on the microphone. Okay, I get it. I understand. And the whole, someone else can rat you out. I mean, I always said I thought it was hilarious that going to school was akin to living in Stalinist Russia, where you could be just minding your own business. Next thing you know, you're on the list and being dragged off to be shot. And that's if you're lucky. Anybody who's seen that so-called comedy, The Death of Stalin, knows what I'm talking about. Anyways, try to get back on track. I knew one of my assignments was going to be late, so I had to, and because I didn't have a job now, I decided to, okay, give me some studio time after class so I could work on this. There was this girl there named Lori Regato, who assigned me to a studio, a practice studio. And then these kids were just getting upset with me because I was in their studio. And I'm like, oh, for the love of God, fine, I'm sorry. And I stomped out there. I found her, and she only realized I was there because I stood there and then smacked my hand against the door jamb like I was going to, like someone who was sitting there just holding himself up. She turns around slowly, and I go, it would help if you assigned me to a studio that wasn't being used in the afternoon. She has the nerve to get on me like, well, I didn't know. I'm like, well, you're supposed to know. You're the video floater. I got work to do. I didn't ask to be suspended. And then the afternoon video floater, I almost broke down crying in front of again. And they're like, don't worry. You have that school mentality where you get suspended for 1, 2, 3 days, but it doesn't stop. You're still supposed to do your job. It's not an excuse to get your assignment turned in on time. So that's how I was feeling at the time. Eventually I did get that done. And eventually I felt like I was getting back on track, painful as it was. Beforehand, I had this is another example of how much I was paying attention to the rules, or caring about my own rules about swearing before I learned what the real rule was. I wanted to do a speech, and it was about my pathetic attempts at love at the time. Yeah. And I had to ask I had to ask the teacher of that class if I could use the word vagina, if that was going to be okay. And he did give me the go ahead to use it. I tried to just explain to people that I don't mean any harm. I don't know what's going on in my life. I'm trying, I talked about a number of things about the whole thing and like what I had been experiencing up until then. It almost didn't work because I still was bothering a bunch of girls, which I don't know how the hell I was doing that. Yeah, there was maybe one or two girls that would look good, but I wasn't trying to get with any of them, believe it or not. I figured all my tail chasing, if you will, was at my job that I no longer had. But it was actually the silver lining to this black cloud because it changed how I could do public speaking in my life forever. I was the last person who ever wanted to get up and give a speech or have to look at the crowd. I think it was because I kept getting picked on. I was always afraid I was going to see bad, like bad facial, or people were going to laugh at me and I was going to run off crying and all that stupid stuff. I figured if I could talk about that, I could talk about anything. And that's never changed. And here I am speaking to, nobody's come in here because of course I only have 7 followers here, and I'm hoping to eventually start gaining followers again on this channel, because my other channel, which still has 74 followers, but unfortunately because of all the flipping over that I'm going to be doing in my life, I'm trying to start over and I still can't get enough people to sign on to me. Oh well, I don't know where I'm going to have to go, but it's like a lot of things, you kind of have to just build off of something. I mean, I was so happy to get to 50 subscribers here, and now I'm at 500, but still, let's not get off track. So for the next couple of weeks, it seemed I'm trying to get back in the groove of things. So after one day, Sue calls me down to her office again. I'm like, oh no, now what? I walk in, there's 2 police officers, and she mentions that I have that she overheard something about what I was going to do or whatnot, and I'm now terminated. And she tried to be nicer compared to how she was 2 weeks earlier. She was nicer. They're basically here to make sure you leave without incident, and they are going to arrest, and literally they will arrest you if you don't leave the premises quietly. You can't get a freaking police officer down to take care of a woman who's being freaking beaten by her husband. But these 2 police officers in Southfield, Michigan, which also has neighborhoods that are not exactly the most pleasant on the planet, have all the time in the world to come down here because the right-hand person of the schoolmaster of this school feels threatened over something that wasn't going to happen. And if it was going to happen, it would have already happened, or it would have happened later. So my life at Specs was over. They searched my car. They frisked me. And then I left. And then a day later, I got a personal protection order from the college stating not to reach out, not to, not to, you know what I mean, what a personal protection order was. We were going to sue, but then we just never did. And it was probably going to be pointless because it was another one of those situations where, the amount you're going to sue for, the amount you're trying to sue from not having to pay, always is trumped by how much, I hate using that word, always was overtaken by how much it was going to cost you to sue. When I was thinking of trying it one last time, it was going to cost me almost half of what I was suing for just to walk in the lawyer's office. It was sad. But anyways, so I never, I ended up dating one girl who finally decided that she wanted to talk to me, which was, I always thought that was kind of ironic because I finally talked my parents into getting a faster modem for me to do Prodigy. And after spending all this time in the pre-plug and play days, trying to get the modem going, she came along, and then suddenly I had no reason to be on Prodigy anymore or use the computer for a while until I really started getting interested in other internet stuff. But anyways, At some point, I drove to another college where we could build a computer. It was like called the National Institute of Technology. I don't know if I had gone to the college, if I would have came away with anything worth getting a job over at the time. But at one point, we were actually at an Amoco gas station, which are now BP's, across the street, literally across the street from Specs Tower. That was as close as I came to to there, and that was during the PPO. And she knows that. She knew I was on that thing. She knew what I went through, and she was willing to stay with me. That's why, Christy Hoover, you should have been a keeper for me. But it wasn't meant to be. I think we always discussed this. It may not have been meant to be forever. It should have been a lot longer than it was. That's all I could say. But anyways, but that's as close as it ever came. And then I did, and then here's the funny part. Specs himself, whose real name was Jerry Liebman, was, let's just say, of a religion who famously wants to make all kinds of money and either does not want to spend it or give any of it back to whoever they got it from. I found out that he made it a point to throw me out on the first day of the 13th week of my enrollment. That way he could get me for tuition for 13 through 16 weeks. So now I owed this son of a bitch $100.28, which I all but refused to pay for about 2 to 3 years, until I finally broke down and paid it. But I think they had negotiated. They offered half at that point, and I finally paid it. But I refused. I didn't want to pay it. I already didn't receive what I wanted. I got thrown out for what I thought was unfair, and I think to this day I still think it was unfair. But the fact of the matter is that the truth of the whole thing was this. Number one, I was set up for failure from day one, as you may have guessed, because they didn't tell me the rules until it was basically too little too late to adjust and get myself back on track. If I had known that there was no swearing allowed on property entirely, oh, you better believe I would have made sure I curbed it to the point where if I could go 8 to 10 weeks before they finally really try to rip me a new one for using that language, the occasional slip up out in the hallway that wasn't picked up by somebody probably was barely even going to affect me throughout that whole time. One of my biggest arguments is that, if I graduated from your school and I went on to a radio station and I got fined, fired, and boycotted and pretty much blackballed from the entire industry, that's my problem. That's not his problem. It's my problem. I'm the one with the job. I'm the one that is responsible for his own job. That's why at some point when some people argue with me about how I do my job, I go, you worry about your job, I'll worry about mine. That's it. I mean, that was one of my biggest arguments about the whole thing, but I'm reasonably sure because he was so what do you call it? Such an icon in the business that and these people would get these two people, they used to call them Team Nancy, because it was two people that would help you with job placement. It would come back on them and on him if, like, how'd you let this guy get through school? If I get it. But the other problem I had was at 21 years old, I already had a car payment and a couple of 2 or 3 credit cards. And the job in the beginning does not pay jack. Okay. I don't know what's starting. I don't know at this point what starting DJs make, but depending on the state you're in and what their minimum wage law is, it's probably not much. It's probably not enough to fully live off. I mean, at the time I started, it was about $6 to $7 an hour, I think. I know. His name was Dick Kernan. He's the guy he was with you for all 32 weeks. That was the man that told the truth. He was the one who literally would sit you down He's the one that basically said, sit down. When you get this job, you're not going to New York City. You're not going to Chicago. You're not even going to stay here in Detroit. You're going to some podunk, tiny little, farm town where you're not going to make jack, but, think about it. The cost of living is different. My personal favorite thing was when he mentioned it this way. At the time I did this, we had already had like the mid-90s network affiliation flip around that a lot of people probably knew, and Detroit was no exception, okay? We were one of the ones where our CBS affiliate went to Fox, and then CBS was in such shambles at the time that they had a hard time finding new affiliates in a lot of cities. They were somehow able to get on like some higher profile station or maybe just trade places with another channel. Detroit was one of them where they couldn't find anybody, and they finally had to buy this cheap shit TV station that hardly anybody watched just to keep CBS in Detroit, okay? And they hadn't had a news this channel hadn't had a news program in forever, and they were getting ready to build one. But it was speculated by the time we graduated, the news program would be open. He said, yeah, if you're going into television, if any of you are going into TV, do not go over there and try to get a job. They'll laugh you out of the building. And then he kind of explained the food chain. They're going to call people, if they're going to call anybody up from a bigger, that if the promotion is going to happen, they're going to call people up, because Detroit was just inside the top 10 market. I think they still are. They're going to call people up from, say, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Cleveland. Okay? They go to Detroit. Those people in Cleveland, in those cities, they call up people from smaller places like Fort Wayne, Indiana, Toledo, Ohio, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Okay? They call them up to those stations. Toledo, Grand Rapids, and and Fort Wayne, they look to even smaller markets, like all the way up in northern Michigan. There's Marquette and Traverse City, and then there's maybe in Wisconsin, there's like Rhineland or Wisconsin or Wausau. They're going to call people from there. And then guess who fills those spots? We do. If you ever want to know really how it looks to be right out of graduating from like a journalism school or a broadcasting school, go to Alpena, Michigan, and turn on channel 11 up there and watch their news program. Oh my Lord, it is the most amateurish thing in the world. In that market, you get Traverse City, Sault Ste. Marie, which basically, there's like all three major legacy network affiliates. They're on satellite channels that are actually broadcast as such. NBC is News Channel 7 and 4. ABC is Channel 29 and 8. And then CBS was TV 9 and 10. It's because it's Traverse City, and then the satellites are Sault Ste. Marie. And and trust me, that looks like a well-oiled machine compared to Alpena. The call letters were WBKB, and you know what people used to say that stood for? We barely know broadcasting. I think they're the third smallest TV market in America. The smallest is it's in Montana. The name escapes me, but whatever. Some people might remember if you watch. But anyways, he was the guy, and we loved him. And you know what? We used to write WDKR, Dick Kernan rules. He was a great man. He passed away about 5 years back. But he was a great man. And the truth was, and now to get back to where I was about this whole thing. Here I am, going to go into radio because I feel like that's where I belong. As a matter of fact, if you may have heard me earlier kind of do an announcement style voice, people say I could have done really well as an announcer. In fact, I went on the NBC studio tour in New York City, and they did like a 5-minute TV, like a variety show, kind of like a late show or whatever you call it. And I immediately volunteered to be the announcer. People said, "Damn, you're good." I still wish I had the video to just put up here because it went away after a while. I guess they get rid of them after a couple of years. I feel like if I ever go back to New York, I got to do it again just so I have it again. But that's what a lot of people said. But the fact of the matter was, I had a car payment and a few credit cards, and I'm being told that I have to that my first job is going to pay like $6 to $7 an hour, which back in the mid 90s, you either could afford rent or a car payment, not both. Unless maybe I took, and this is something I could have done if I had gotten in for real. I could have rented a room for like, I don't know, $100 a month, just lived in someone's house and had the bedroom. I could have done that. This is where 3 years earlier, right out of high school, I could have gone in, and if it really was my calling, I could have gone in and done. And went right out of school. I had a Ford Ranger my parents bought me. Yes, I was that spoiled. And it was perfectly fine. I could have gone down to some podunk town in Indiana or whatever, or Ohio, started my career down there, making what little I could make, either living off the cheapest food you could get, like ramen noodles or cheap TV dinners, or, off the Wendy's night value menu or McDonald's value menu or something. I don't know. It would have been better. Meanwhile, here I am thinking that the only job I'm going to be able to get right out of graduation might be at there was a radio station in WHMI out in Howell, Michigan. And the only thing I was ever told by, and Ray Prosser told me this, do not make it sound like they're a stepping stone. If you say, "Where do you see yourself?" He told me what to say. I can't remember. I probably would have had to have him repeat that to me if I had made it. So, in closing on this, I know for a fact that I had declared at some point when I wrote the letter that it's a combination of both of our faults, mine and the colleges. My own, because I went there at the wrong time. I should have went there 3 years earlier if I really was going to try this. But it's their fault for not telling me the rules ahead of time. And I kind of felt that was a compromise that I could have used. And then at one point I felt like, and I asked for this and I knew it wasn't going to work, but if it did, I was going to be shocked, that they should give me back about $4,000 because, in the time since then, the, what do you call it? The tuition price, of course, doubled because of inflation. So, and I basically had spent $4,000. So like in today's money, I was $8,000. So I figured, okay, you give me back $4,000, which is in actual dollar amount what I, paid you, although not worth as much today. But in a way, it's splitting the difference. Because, okay, I think I'm owed back some of the money. That's how I still feel. I'll likely never see it. Like I said, whoever saw this probably either laughed at me or it may have gotten lost somewhere because of where I sent it. I probably, if I could send that again, I probably should have sent it certified so I knew someone signed for it. Although I did kind of picture like a letter from either the college and or their lawyer basically saying, here's $2,000 and this is a take it or leave it offer. And here's the stipulation. Once this check is cashed, you are never to speak to us, about us, whatever, ever again. And I would have agreed to that. I would have. It's never going to happen, but I would have. Are some of you wondering what the point is? Well, I wanted to tell my story about trying to become a DJ or a radio personality, which there were times I actually said, what would be your dream job? And it would have been like hot political talk radio. I think I could have had my own talk radio show. I really think I could have. But it is what it is. It wasn't meant to be. If it had been meant to be, it would have happened. Another thing I've always loved, and I swear every broadcasting school, Specs Howard or anybody, should do this. They should show the pilot episode of WKRP in Cincinnati, because that is literally like everything's talked about, everything that happened or what could have happened or what does happen is all kind of tied into 30 minutes. If you've seen WKRP in Cincinnati, Andy Travis gets called up from Santa Fe, which, I think there's more radio markets than TV markets, but I thought Santa Fe was part of Albuquerque, but maybe it's not. Who knows? But, Dr. Johnny Fever is talking about how, and he was going by his regular name, Johnny Caravella. And then he talked about how he said the word booger on the air in Los Angeles, being a morning drive person making $100,000 a year in the late 60s. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money today. Well, it's not a lot of money today nowadays, but that's a shit ton of money back in the late 60s. He says booger on the air. A couple of bozos call the studio to complain. The next thing you know, he's in Amarillo, Texas, hosting a gardening show. Poor guy. But the fact of the matter is that you can go up the ladder just as quick as you can go down the ladder. The broadcasting world is a roller coaster. My own brother told me that he was listening to someone there in Toledo, Ohio, where he lives basically in Michigan, but he lives in like one of the two suburbs of Toledo that are in Michigan. There was a guy who bragged at one point. I don't know why he was bragging, but he was bragging that he was the highest paid overnight DJ in Toledo, Ohio, and he was making like $9 an hour in 2006. It's 10 years later. I was making like $11, $12 an hour at my job, and I couldn't even hold close to the same lifestyle I held delivering pizzas, for goodness sakes. So that was another thing. And then I think one person, I did an announcement thing, and she was like, man, you sound like you could have done announcement work. Yeah, that's where sometimes I look at myself and say, why didn't this happen? And this is why I don't know if this is ever going to take off, but maybe I'm not a public figure. I don't know. But that's why I'm kind of switching over some stuff, because I just want to get away from one way and go to another. But and then because of the stupidity of WKRP in Cincinnati and their owner and the general manager, who was her son, they were worried about the type of music that was being played on the radio, the format they decided to change from. And they were like, oh no, we can't have this. Travis, you're fired. Like, you can get fired within 30 minutes. You can get fired. They could decide they don't want you like almost as soon as you got there and got your, and the lyrics to the opening song is the same thing. I got tired of packing and unpacking, tired town to town, up and down the dial. Some people do somehow manage to stay in a city. There was a lot of changes. When I was growing up when I was growing up in Detroit, there was a radio station, 94.7. It was not Magic 95 because it was still when I was a kid. There was most radio stations were still the turn the radio, or if it was a fancy like I wouldn't call it fancy, but nowadays back then it was the you had the 5 mechanical presets. I always thought that was kind of fun. But and the things kept moving back and forth. But it was Magic 95, which right now 94.7 is now a classic rock station. It's been so since 87. So it's going on almost 20 years, 40 years. Damn. But anyways, there was a morning show called Jeff and Jer. And if you're from San Diego, you know who Jeff and Jer is because that's where they settled and that's where they were until they finally basically retired. And I think one of them went up to Sacramento to work on a religious station, and then I think the other one just retired. I can't remember which one. I had to look them up because I was going to go to San Diego one weekend a few years ago, and I was always hoping to listen to the Jeff and Jer show once on one of the two like light rock stations in San Diego. But what they did is that they packed up for Chicago, and then they were just about ready to pack up for Boston, the two of them, until they got a call in San Diego. And then they moved to San Diego, California, and never left. They bounced between the two stations most of the time, but that was it. There's that luckiness if you actually can stay where you are and not get fired. I mean, my God. I mean, WRIF in Detroit is Arthur Penhall or Arthur P., where he had him for so many years. That man was on the air since the day it became a rock station. Things like that can happen. But otherwise, it can happen to others where you're just going to bounce from one place to another. If you make a mistake, you could be going from the top all the way back down to the bottom of the food chain. So if any of you are watching this because you are tempted to get into radio, think about it. Think about the life you're going to probably have, where you're going to move to God knows where. You're going to talk about God knows what. You could be like Howard Stern. If Private Parts was the movie was any indication, he went to Detroit and worked for W4 back when it was a rock station, and his life was not exactly in the greatest position, even in a top 5 radio market. So I mean, you never know what's going to happen to you in that industry. And if you're anything like me and you get easily angered, first and foremost, you may want to seek some professional help to get your anger under control. And don't act like you don't have a problem. You do. In any business where and there's a lot of things. And that was another thing Dick Kernan said. He's like, yeah, you're going to start off making peanuts. And you're going to complain that you can make more money delivering pizzas. He goes, yeah, that's true. But where are you going to be in the next year? Still delivering pizzas. And I know how that feels. Whereas in a year, you could go from making $7 an hour to maybe twice as much working in a bigger market. It's like a lot of things. If you're in the entertainment industry of any kind, sometimes you got to grind it out, working your butt off for very little money before someone finally discovers you. Rock and roll and other recording artists have gone through that. Listen to Rock and Roll Band by Boston. That's actually kind of an autobiography. They started out not making a lot of money. They started actually becoming, local sensations. And finally, some record producer came to the stage and said, I think we got ourselves something here. And there you go. Let's read any wrestler's autobiography. There are wrestlers who go and wrestle in front of nobody, wrestle in National Guard armories, wrestle in high school gyms, and they're lucky if they make enough money to get home in gas. But then if you do good enough and you get a call up from a bigger promotion, you start making more money, and then till you get to the WWE. And that's when the real money rolls in. It happens. There's some industries like that, and radio is no exception to it. TV's no exception to it. You just got to be careful what you say, and that's what bothers me sometimes about the FCC in this country. At one point they decided not The president didn't do it. Congress didn't do it. They decided that radio and TV are not were not protected by the First Amendment, and I think that should be revoked. The FCC was put into place to make sure that they give out radio license and make sure the airways aren't clogged in areas. I mean, it gets tough. They shouldn't be telling you what you can and cannot say on the air. And this was back when there were 3 channels. Now we got hundreds and hundreds of different channels, networks, streaming services. It's like, I don't know. I'm not going to go that far. But I've gone over a little bit. I've gone over by about 5 minutes from my official timing of my official start of this. Next week, I'm going to be talking about a lot of cool things. I'm going to be on location too. I'll tell you about it then. Okay? So anybody who does watch this, it was live, but nobody came in here because, of course, when you only have 7 people, how many people are actually going to show up? Oh, well. I will see you next week. Have a good day. Prayers.